Hey, what is up? Kolst here. Let's talk about one of the most underappreciated parts of Hearthstone Arena, which is the Mulligan. So Hearthstone Arena isn't the most complex game format in Hearthstone or in gaming in general, but one thing that often gets glossed over is the Mulligan, and oftentimes, because of the simplicity of the game, the Mulligan is one of the biggest and most impactful decisions you make in the entire game, so it deserves a lot more attention than most people give it. One of the most common comments I get in my Twitch streams, which you can check out by the way at twitch.tv/kolst, is how essentially unconventional my mulligans are, where I'll keep slower cards that most people would just instantly toss, and I just wanted to kind of explain my thought process that goes into these decisions. In talking about this, I think there's four main factors in the mulligan that I tend to look at. And I think really most people only tend to look at the first one. The first one is curve, which I think is pretty obvious. It's making sure you have minions to play on 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. The second one is power, which is the power level of the cards that you're offered. You want to keep stronger rather than weaker cards. The third one is your game plan. What cards do you need to actually win the game to fulfill the win condition of your deck, which you should be thinking about as well. And the fourth one is proactive versus reactive. Just in general, you want to keep cards in the mulligan which are more proactive. You might be able to keep one or maybe two reactive cards, but generally you want proactive plays because it's just they're more likely to be useful in the early game. So let's go through all these points individually. Again, number one was curve. I think this doesn't need too much explanation. You want a 1 mana card, a 2 mana card, a 3 mana card. A lot of times, not every meta you have 1 mana cards, but you want to be fitting the curve. I don't think I really have to explain much there. I think most people got that. I will say, however, there is a difference going second. Because going second, the ideal curve does not necessarily look the same as it does going first. If going first, you'd rather go 1, 2, 3, 4. Going second, you often want to actually use your coins, so it might be better to go 1, 3, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 4. And in Shaman, you have a kind of similar situation because of overload, but in general, so it's just, you want to be making sure you know exactly how you want to be spending your mana. The second consideration is the power level of cards, so this is, I think, also pretty intuitive, but obviously you want to keep the stronger cards in general. So maybe you have a perfect curve, quote unquote, but it's a 1 mana 1/1, a 2 mana 2/2, and a terrible 3-drop. It's like, well, it's a curve, but do you really want that curve? I don't know. You might want to toss it, especially if you have, if you have like a weak 2-drop and you have a lot of premium 2-drops in your deck, or 3-drop or whatever, you might want to toss it and try to find something better. In the same way, if you have something that isn't really an early curve minion, doesn't fit point number 1, but it's like Hammer the Naru, for instance, this card is just insanely broken, it's probably worth missing half your curve, just because this card will recover it all by itself anyway. So you want to think about that. Just if there's a super premium card, it's definitely something you want to be worth keeping, or at least thinking about keeping. The third point is about the game plan of your deck, and this also has to do with your deck balance. So in this, I think there are 2 points. The first one is, if you have like a whole bunch of like a certain number of cards, like you have a bunch of 3-drops, say you have like way too many, like 9 3-drops in your deck, you're going to be less likely, especially if it's non-premium, to keep a 3-drop, right? You'll probably draw into one anyway. In the same way, the exact converse, if you only have, I'm playing drafts right now, I only have like 1 good 4-drop in the entire deck, and if I see that 4-drop, I'm gonna keep it almost always, because the thing is it's great if you hit your 2-drop and your 3-drop, but if you completely whiff your 4-drop, I mean, it's basically like you didn't hit your curve at all, right? It's not just about hitting the early turns, it's about you want to be filling as much mana as possible, not just the early turns. And also the second half of that is the game plan. So sometimes you might have a deck, for example, something you want to be thinking about when you're maybe at the end of your draft, where if your deck doesn't really have the ability to play aggro, but also doesn't really have a lot of value, you might need to consider that something like a Steward of Scrolls, you might need to keep stuff like that, potentially, if you have a good enough early curve to probably stay alive, because that might be your win condition. And if you just don't draw that, you might just not be able to win. So, this is just, again, things you want to be thinking about. And in the same way, if you're an aggro deck, maybe you have like a kind of weak 3-drop and 4-drop or something, well, you need to be the aggro. You can't just take a kind of meh curve. You need to find your 1 and 2 drops. So sometimes you need to like mulligan more aggressively than you would in another deck. And even again, you can have other decks where you have so many slow cards that you might not want to mulligan so hard. If you have like 7 cards that aren't playable before like turn 7, for instance, maybe you want to be a little careful tossing away your 3 and 4 drops, because if they all get replaced by 8 drops, you immediately lose the game. So it's kind of not ideal, I guess, to instantly lose on turn 0. But yeah. And then the last consideration on my list is proactive versus reactive cards. So just in general, you don't want to keep too many reactive cards in your mulligan. And one thing I will say is going second, again, you have a bit more leniency for this because you get an extra card going second, and you also have the coin to make things work. So Aug Merchants are a really good example, the 1-mana 2/1s that deal 1 damage with a bonus effect. Going second, you just have way more flexibility, and you can use them reactively. Where going first, if you think about it, since you have to spend 1 mana on the Aug Merchant, you're always going to be playing off curve if you ever play as Aug Merchant. So really, you're never going to want to play it. You're just going to want to play on curve. So keeping Aug Merchant, unless you want to play it on turn 1, which you will more likely want to do only if you're the aggro deck, or you think you will be the aggro deck. Otherwise, you really just aren't going to want to play it. So you'll be looking for something else most of the time. So I think that covers my main points. I guess the other things I want to bring up is just you shouldn't be always making the same decisions in every deck. These decisions in the mulligan should really be depending largely on what is in your deck and just how the game plan and how your deck wants to win. And also you should be thinking about what your opponent is likely to be doing as well. Obviously in Arena you don't always know. But if they're a hunter, they're more likely to be aggro. If they're a priest, they're more likely to be control, right? So you want to keep in mind, if you think your opponent's going to be aggro, I think the mulligan becomes a lot more straightforward. You just want to stay alive. But against a control matchup, you want to think about whether you want to be the aggro yourself or if you want to try to compete in the control game. So you're going to make very different mulligan decisions based on which side of that coin you think you're going to be on. So I think one thing which is a good practice in general, but especially if you're less experienced with really thinking about the mulligan, is at the end of your draft would be the ideal time to just really think about like how your deck wins, what kind of stuff your deck is missing or has too much of. So just thinking about what kind of things you want to be particularly looking for or don't necessarily need as much as you typically would. So that way you just don't have too much to think about when that first mulligan hits and you just realize, oh crap, I don't actually know what I'm looking for. Just, use that time efficiently there. So I think that covers my main points. I guess the other things I want to bring up is just you shouldn't be always making the same decisions in every deck. These decisions in the mulligan should really be depending largely on what is in your deck and just how the game plan and how your deck wants to win. And also you should be thinking about what your opponent is likely to be doing as well. Obviously in Arena you don't always know, but if they're a hunter, they're more likely to be aggro. If they're a priest, they're more likely to be control, right? So you want to keep in mind, if you think your opponent's going to be aggro, I think the mulligan becomes a lot more straightforward. You just want to stay alive. But against a control matchup, you want to think about whether you want to be the aggro yourself or if you want to try to compete in the control game. So you're going to make very different mulligan decisions based on which side of that coin you think you're going to be on. Anyway, I think that's about it. Thanks a lot for hanging out, everyone. If you made it to the end, if you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. And also you can follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/kolst, where we do a lot of live streams. And if you have any idea for what kind of content you would like to see, this is essentially part of my Arena guide playlist. So any particular topics you want to see, to you to leave this comment below, or any comment to anything, the color of your ceiling or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The algorithm doesn't know the difference, all right? So just anything, the algorithm likes it. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks a lot again. We'll see you guys next time.